Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for joining us. If you've been watching some of these SESAR JU deploying in a time of COVID panels that we've done before the summer, you may remember that I said that was a series of 4. Well, you'll be pleased today to know that you're watching the 5th in a series of 4 of these special podcasts. And today we are actually discussing deployment and the whole deploying in the time of COVID, and what is it that we need to do and what is it that we need to do differently and so forth. And so today, very much focused on deployment, very much focused on the ANSP perspective. And so it's an enormous pleasure to be able to introduce this afternoon's panel, Tanya Grobacek, who is, of course, the director of CANSO's European office, Nicholas Wawinsko, who is the head of the SESAR deployment office, and Florian Gillemay, the executive director of SESAR, of course, who's with us at every one of these sessions and brings his wisdom to the table. If I may, Tanya, perhaps if I could start with you. A few months ago, in the life that we had before COVID, the big issue that we were all worried about was capacity. We had capacity problems and we had all these delays that we needed to resolve. No capacity problems at the moment.
No, not at the moment.
So what problems do we have?
Okay, initially when, it's a very interesting what you said. Initially when COVID hit, we had to think about our staff and how do they continue working, providing 24-hour services in the time of epidemic. So we had to look how do we schedule people. So even if the traffic was less, believe it or not, initially there was some, capacity challenges with reduced traffic. But eventually, this capacity demand will come back. What we need to do better is to be scalable. And this is something that we will have to deal. And I think this is opportunity. It's a very difficult time in finding the financing and time, but scalability is needed more than ever.
That's a really interesting concept, scalability. I'm also not interested, you talked about financing. We'll come back to financing, I'm sure. So Nicola, all the SESAR deployment work, has that been wasted now that we don't need to worry about capacity? You're on mute, I'm afraid. Can you, there we go, thank you.
Sorry, I was saying that it has to happen and it happens to me. So sorry for that. I was saying good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Andrew, for the question. Well, indeed, there is no doubt that at least for the short term, we can only report a huge impact of the crisis on the SESAR deployment activities. Nevertheless, on the positive side, I would like also to report that the vast majority of our stakeholders, including SESAR deployment manager, I can add, consider that this crisis is just shifting the need, but the need will come back. Need for capacity in particular, Andrew, as you were referring to capacity. So what we observe as far as deployment is concerned is that for sure deployment is strongly impacted, in particular because most of the budget which have been earmarked for deployment have been reallocated to other priorities, due in particular to the shortage of cash among the stakeholders. But there is again this common vision that challenge will come back, need for capacity will come back, and what we hopefully observe now after the, I would say, the peak of the crisis, and even if we are all aware how fragile the situation remains, but at least also on the side of SESAR deployment, we have restarted the activities. And whilst our count of completed projects has been frozen at 144 during the crisis, already today we are up to 151, and we expect to be close to 200 by the end of the year, which shows that we have a real restart and keeping the interest.
So sorry, Nicola, can I pick you up on that? You had a deployment plan that was originally designed to address the capacity crisis. Tanya makes the very good point that the capacity crisis won't go away. It's just been put on ice for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is that the investments that you're making, the deployment that you're doing, is still in accordance with the previous plan. In other words, it's addressing the capacity issues. Is it also addressing the scalability point that Tanya raised?
To some extent, yes, but here I need to recall that SESAR deployment is strongly framed by a regulation which is known as a pilot common project. So it's not something you can change from one day to another, even because of a big crisis like the one into which we are. However,
well, welcome, and to anyone listening in here not from the European Union, welcome to the European Union. Not even a global pandemic will change the European regulations. So, yeah, welcome. Yeah. So if I could perhaps, Florian, turn to you.
I know you don't like this type of remark, but let me finish.
Sorry.
I immediately want to caveat my statement by, I would say, a good coincidence, which is that the crisis came at the very same time we were concluding with the stakeholders the review of the pilot common project and the proposal for the first common project, CP1, which is the successor to the pilot common project. And of course, this final round, which really took place in February, March, and then now is even continuing with the European Commission in the lead, came very timely to directly inject into the new regulation, CP1, the change in priorities, also change in timing, which are the consequence of this crisis. Because indeed, even regulation cannot ignore such a crisis of such a magnitude.
Well, I'm pleased. I guess I'm pleased to hear that. I guess I'm pleased to hear that. Florian, if I can move to you, perhaps. Let's talk about the crisis and the crisis of this magnitude. I read somewhere the other day that someone said that the pandemic hasn't changed anything, it's just sped everything up. All the stuff that was going to happen is now happening more quickly. Is that the case for ATM, do you think, and where we're going? And you've got your mic on mute as well, I'm afraid. It isn't just happening to one, Nicola, it's happening to.
I'm the second one. Okay, I was saying yes and no. Yes, in the sense that ATM is not disconnected from what's happening in the rest of the technology domain. In all sorts of companies, we do see today an acceleration of the pace of the digital transformation. And to a certain extent, we are seeing that in air traffic management. We do have today training of controllers, which is organized in a different manner with virtualization environment. We do see as well in the context of the SESAR research activities that validation activities of new system, new functionalities that we thought would have to be conducted on site in the premises of the operation centers and so on can actually be conducted at least partially remotely. So things are as well coming in this environment in terms of acceleration. On the other hand, we know as well that we are in a domain which is reluctant to change, which takes time to evolve for good reasons like safety, but as well for a certain degree of conservatism. And I think this is really where we have to make this crisis as an opportunity. I mean, this crisis, let's be clear, is bad for everyone. It's bad for the entire aviation ecosystem in particular. But I think there we have an opportunity to reflect upon how we roll out modernization, how we implement things. And we have the duty, I would say, because the financial constraint will be so hard, that we have to revise the priorities. And as Nicolas said, there are a number of things which are in the pipe, which I do believe are fundamentally right, because they are the kind of basis for upgrading the future system. But now we need to reflect as well on how we will deploy the new functionalities in the future. And some of them will have to be deployed in a very synchronized manner at European level. some others can be deployed at a more agile individual level. And I think this is where the crisis will force some kind of reform compared to what we've been doing so far. It will push for an acceleration, but we are not there yet. I think as well, there is a different perception of how hard the crisis will be, with some who are still expecting that this will be recovered maybe in 6 months, in 1 year time, and some others who really start to feel that the business models that we've been having in ATM so far is not sustainable anymore.
Well, I love talking about A and SP business models. Thank you. We're going to get to that when we get to financing. But before we do, first of all, who are these optimists that think that this will all be over in 6 months' time? Where are these people? We should be selling their blood as some sort of magic cream. But in terms of that prioritisation, should we still be focusing on capacity? Should we be focusing on efficiency? Should we be focusing on what Tanya talked about, which is sustainability? Where should our focus be?
I think
question for you, Florian, then for you as well, Tanya.
Okay.
If you don't
I pick up first. So to me, I mean, this debate of where we should focus in ATM, I believe we have to stop it. Don't get me wrong, I'm going to answer to you. Obviously, we have short-term priorities which are not the same as they were 6 months ago. But about 1 year ago, we were with Nicolas actually sitting in this wise person group, and this was all about capacity. I mean, capacity was everywhere. That was the holy grail that we were asked to chase. While actually 3 years ago, we were chasing cost efficiency. And if I move again 6 years backwards, we were chasing environmental sustainability. So every 3 years or 2 years, we change our targets in this domain. And this is why we are making mistakes as well in terms of investments. And we consider as well that things that are good for capacity are not necessarily good for environment or good for cost efficiency. One of the key outcomes, I think, of SESAR is that this proves to be wrong. We have today technologies that can deliver benefits in those different domains. And these are the technologies on which we need to invest. And as you said, coming back to your question, one of the key priorities today is, in my view, the scalability of the system, because this is what will make it sustainable from a financial standpoint. But it doesn't mean that because we invest on technologies that makes the system more scalable, it is not good for environment, or it is not good for cost efficiency or for other performance domain.
Okay, thank you. Tanya, what are your thoughts there?
But Florian actually covered a lot of that because I wanted to talk about these shifting targets and chasing different targets every 2 to 3 years. I think we need to focus. Now in Europe, we have very ambitious sustainable goals, and we need to focus on how to deliver these sustainable goals. And it is about performance-based, navigation. How do we do that? Not to prescribe certain KPIs chasing capacity or CO2 reduction or cost. It needs to be sustainable. SESAR technology is an important role to play in improving this efficiency in aviation in the near term. We won't see electric aircrafts that soon, so efficiency has to be reached via new technologies in ATM in a way. There is no immediately. There is not much what we can do. There is not zero emission fuels. There is no electric aircraft. So this is where we need to focus our investments.
But if we had an airline person on this panel today, he or she would say, "What do you mean the targets are shifting? What do you mean they're shifting? We want absolute efficiency in terms of routing, in terms of getting what we need, in terms of trajectory management, and we want absolute efficiency in terms of costs." To what extent is now the time for us to be looking at those sorts of things and to be trying to focus, to redesign rather than just say, well, let's just keep going? I mean, isn't COVID a time, or the pandemic, a time for us to actually go back and try again?
If I may start on this, Andrew, I would like first to reinforce what Florian has said. I think, and the way I see the portfolio of projects that we manage at SESAR Deployment Manager, nearly all the projects contribute to all the objectives, in fact, to all the priorities. So I think it's useless to have a too long debate what needs to come first. I think from the very beginning of SESAR, we have an operational concept which is quite well identified. The airspace architecture study also brought some clarification on how to better achieve it. But the technology is the technology, and we know that we have a pipe quite full of new technologies that definitely needs to be rolled out. I would even say whatever the priority tomorrow. Everything is interrelated, in fact, and that's why, for me, it's a package. It tends to be a package, and that's this full package that we need to roll out. Certainly, if you want me to give you maybe one aspect of priority I could buy, it is the network dimension. I really believe that if we need to focus on something, that's the performance of the network that we must first serve. This being clarified.
But Nicholas, would you share the frustration that what I'm hearing is that everything's fine, everything's terrific? First of all, I'm not 100% convinced that's right, that everything is fine and that everything is terrific at the moment. And I think ANSPs are suffering. I mean, that's at many levels, that's not their fault. But what I'm not seeing from the ANSPs, which I realise isn't anything to do with SESAR deployment, but what I'm not seeing from the ANSPs is any sort of structural flexibility, any sort of business model flexibility. And again, Tanya, I could be wrong, and I'd be delighted to be told that I'm wrong. But I'm not seeing, I mean, what I'm hearing from you, Nicola, is, look, we're on this perfect path. It is the perfect route, and we should go down it. I mean, do you see that people might be frustrated with it?
Yeah, I fully understood. And I'm not saying that we are on perfect route. Again, the best evidence of the need for adjustment is that we are catching the opportunity of the CP1 definition to realign time-wise and content-wise a certain number of priorities. So the route is not something frozen forever. We need to adapt. But what I'm trying to say is that, and the latest cost-benefit analysis that we have performed on the CP1 in order to support CP1 adoption in the coming months demonstrates that even with the huge impact of the COVID-19 crisis, still the benefits of a complete package like the CP1 are significant. By 2030, it's in the range of 25 billion euros, which could be modulated minus maybe 15-20%, subject to the duration of the crisis. So it's important, I think, to pass the message that, yes, we are crossing extremely difficult time. The challenge we had before the crisis will come back. Most of the technological answers to this challenge are there and remain fully valid, therefore must be rolled out and will continue to bring benefit. It remains beneficial to work on a project like the pilot common project or the CP1 tomorrow. I think it's extremely important to confirm this message. It's not disregarding the current reality, it's looking forward and keeping the heading in the mid and long term. It's extremely important.
But with respect, it's not disregarding the current crisis. I hear what you're saying, but it is making an enormous assumption about what happens after the crisis, and that assumption is that we're back to business as usual. Florian, are we wasting a crisis? Are we wasting a crisis? You're on mute too, by the way. Speaking of wasting a crisis.
This time. Thanks for that. But I think the future will tell if we waste it or not. I think it's a bit too early to say. We've been all very active to put in place the necessary measures to keep the system operating and to keep it safe and to make sure that we provide continuity and resilience, in particular in the operations. I think that the time for thinking about the future is now coming. We do see the crisis deepening. We do see the financial impact deepening. It's not just a matter of restructuring the revenue stream for a couple of months. It's much more than that. So how we collectively react to that, I think that we have to seriously work on it. And for me, that's part of the discussion that we are having today to start to figure it out. I think that if I take a simple example that you mentioned in terms of how we can use this crisis to restructure our domain, it's, for instance, on the environment. Today, we have across the sky trajectories which are kind of optimized because of the level of traffic we are facing. if we build the new capability of the system, that should be on that basis, that the future system, when the traffic picks up again, should allow those trajectories to be again optimal in the future, regardless of the amount of traffic that is managed in our skies. So for me, this is really the opportunities that we can use today in that context to say, okay, tomorrow we won't have any of those stupid trajectories we had 1 year back when we had this capacity crunch in Europe, where we were obliged to move traffics here and there, north and south, to avoid congested area. No, we need to be clear that today we will not accept that, and that we rebuild the system around optimal trajectory. So that's an example on the environmental side. I think another example that we could think of is in terms of, we've been discussing the what in terms of what can be the priorities that needs to be deployed now. And I do believe that we cannot afford to change course every now and then, because there is anyway a basis that we have to deploy. Just to give you an example on that, I think it's like if we dream about the future applications that we want to have on our iPads, but we don't have the iPad. What we are doing in terms of modernization today is the basic thing. We just need to have the iPad, and then we can start to think about the functionalities. But unless we have this common ground, there's nothing that we can build upon. So to me, there is the what, but there is as well the how, which is maybe we can find better ways of spending the money in the future in terms of investment. I mean, we know the kind of stupid situation we have in Europe with all those radars, all this infrastructure that is redundant without providing any resilience, by the way, at network level. This is a top issue that we have to tackle, the CNS rationalization. That's part of what we've been proposing to drive into implementation. That's another example where we can collectively act to make things better.
I read an interesting interview with Elon Musk the other day, and he said the reason why Tesla is doing a much better job than the legacy car manufacturers, let's put this in aviation terms, the legacy car manufacturers, is because he's starting with the chip and building outwards. He's not starting with the existing car and trying to make the changes inwards. And that allows him to make all sorts of changes at all sorts of speeds. I just leave that for the moment for what it's worth, because you've raised a lot of issues there, Florian. But Tanya, can I come back to you? Are the ANSPs of Europe committed now not to have those stupid trajectories that Florian was speaking about when everything gets better? Are we going to go by trajectory management? Are we going to have, can you see a time when we get to dynamic cross-border control and cross-border sectorization, things like that?
I already see it. Sometimes I get upset when I read about, press releases. We need a more digitalization. We need cross-border. We need, data service provision. It does already happening. Maybe not for the benefits of those within European Commission system. Not in the way it's called now, but there are certain activities that are already taking place. But also there is a reality of that some states are owners or they are the shareholders of the NSPs, and they see this also as a sovereignty issue. So while we will be able, technology is going to enable us to do many, many things, we need to embark or bring our owners, our shareholders along in making this happen. And in some countries you can see a very, very advanced application. In some you cannot. But that depends on the state. Again, when we were talking about investments, some of the states made conscious decision that today in the COVID times, no investments in aviation or technology should not stop. Cut somewhere else, but not in there. Some don't have ability to do or freedom to do this choice. So it does depend. And if you ask if NSPs are committed, yes, of course they are committed. But we need to work with what we have. And sometimes I get so upset. I worked not just in Europe, I've been around a few continents. I get upset sometimes when we are compared with FIA and the US. And it's not the same. The regulator is there and same, and the service provider is the same, and it's the same airspace. So it's much easier to do that there than in European.
I think any comparison with the United Soviet States of America is obviously flawed. There's no disputing that. But I think aren't you mixing two concepts there, or and not just you personally, but aren't we all mixing two concepts here? You said they're my shareholders and they're worried about sovereignty. Well, if they're your shareholders, aren't they taking a business approach? Shouldn't they be taking a business approach? That's my first question. And my second question is, why is sovereignty challenged if I agree to jointly provide provide air traffic control services over my airspace with my neighbour? Unless you've got, very nasty neighbours, obviously, but, those days are behind us. As a general comment, obviously not the French, not the Irish, they've got a very nasty neighbour, but everyone else, has got a fairly easy and a fairly get along with neighbour, haven't they?
They do, but it comes to money. And some.
Okay, thank you. There's the answer.
I need to emphasize
sovereignty is back to money.
Happening. It's happening.
Sovereignty is back to money. Sovereignty is back to money. So let me put that round the other way. Will the money problem, and let's face it, there's a money problem for ANSPs at the moment because there is no traffic. Will the money problem drive sovereignty considerations, do you think?
I think we need look. We just there's a lot of discussion about RP3 still, reference period for the
reference period 3. But we're back to talking about what life will be like in the future when it's like it was in the good old days. And I'm still not convinced that the good old days are going to come back. I think we need to think about maybe RP infinity or something. We need to think about a different reference period. I do wonder. How do we fund the ANSPs today, given that we can't fund them on overflight charges?
Okay, I need to say something before we continue.
Please do. No, it was a question for you anyway, so here's your chance.
Look, for the benefit of some people that I've seen on this webcast is they're airline people, and I used to come. Well, majority of my career is, believe it or not, with the airlines, not NSP. It is different business, NSP investment, it's a long-term investment, and it's not investment that you can park and not to do anything with it when there is no demand. So it's a different kind of business, and I think nobody of us is currently happy about the way the system works. And I don't know, was it Andrew, you who said the other day, the good deal is when all parties are equally unhappy. Actually, this is the only time I think that this is not good deal and all parties, airspace users and us, are equally unhappy. So we need to
let me say two things there, Tanya. One, it's a good compromise when everybody's unhappy, and two, I don't think I'm not the first person to have said that. I was merely quoting someone else because I'm not very original. I'm just a very good quoter of other people's good thinking. Anyway, how are we going to fund ANSPs in the future?
Should be user pay principle.
User pay.
How? I don't.
Okay,
we need to figure out together with our airspace users.
So if one airspace, if it costs €100 to use this airspace and there's one user, he pays 100, and if there's 100 users, they pay €1 each. That's the model we're in at the moment, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people would look at that and think it might be broken.
Okay. If you expect me that I give you now a solution, we don't have a solution.
Okay, all right.
We need
all right. Okay, thank you. I hear that, and if you do have a solution, you can sell it, and good luck to you. And fair enough. And obviously, and I'd steal it. I've already proved that I can do that. So, Nicola, how do we fund ATM in the future?
Yeah, well, before I answer your question, one remark, and I would like to pick up on two statements, one from Tanya and the other one from Florian. We need to first find ways to spend less to achieve same results. I see two ways to do so. First one, Florian has mentioned already, but it is worth repeating. There is room for optimization because as SESAR deployment manager, we have been very much focused in rolling out new layers of infrastructure, but maybe we have not considered enough how to optimize the old one with respect to the new one being implemented. And here I see really a serious source of savings in terms of route charges, because less infrastructure then to be maintained. And the other one is, I would call it improving the deployment, because deployment is not only about what we deploy, but how we deploy it. And I believe that the more we want to focus on benefits to the network, the more we have to address network-wide deployment. And when we observe today's network-wide deployment, one really, I would say, big loss of efficiency is coming from the fact that every piece of deployment is just replicated by any NSPs into the network. There is certainly a need for the most transversal service, I would say, to be provided through a single or maybe not too many infrastructure, rather easy and quick to update and to maintain, and then the data from those infrastructure to be distributed to the NSPs. I'm just talking that's the concept, of course, of ATM data service provider.
Sure. I have no trouble with what you're saying. Makes perfect sense.
Yes.
And I have absolutely no, and of course it's got to be done as a network. But not only do you have that duplication over provider problem, don't you also have a pricing or a costing problem? If I buy a network-wide service, how are we going to work out how to allocate the costs back to the NSPs? Isn't that one of the problems? We can't get cross-border pricing.
Yeah, true. Well, here we are entering into a very specific area, but indeed, we need also to adapt the business model to these new types of provision of service. But I really believe, really based on my experience as SESAR deployment manager, that there is here a real source of saving, or at least optimization of the cost. Because before discussing how to share the cost, I think it is worth spending some time how to optimize those costs. So that's really what I wanted to put forward. Now, vis-a-vis how to fund this, maybe I will just discuss the funding of my part, the deployment. Just to see, to recall where we were before the crisis. So we were managing a portfolio of 343 projects for a total of 2.9 billion investments ongoing under SESAR deployment manager coordination. In these 2.9, we had 1.3 coming from EU, so the grants, and 1.6 coming from industry. So it's about, one could say, half-half, to keep it short. And of course, this model, the half from industry, at least in the short term, is missing and needs to be supported, to be replaced. But again, in the mid and long term, things should come back, will come back, hopefully. So the problem is to bridge the current period. I read some papers and articles where there was some voice calling for 100% of grant. First, I don't think this is needed, because would be needed even only if the whole PCP or CP1 would not be beneficial. It is beneficial, as I said before. Even with the crisis, it remains beneficial. So because there is a benefit at the end, I don't think there is a need for such a 100% grant, even if it would be possible, but I doubt it can be possible anyway. No, what could help to bridge, certainly, and was not really used before the crisis, is the concept of loan, the so-called blending between loan and grants, that maybe we need to investigate much more than we did in the past, because in the past was just not needed. The cash was there to complement the grant. It's no longer there. There is a new area to be investigated. And in fact, it's part of our current contract with the Commission to further investigate, or I would even say reinvestigate, in particular with European Investment Bank, how to blend together the grants and some loan in order to bridge this particularly critical period.
So Florian, thank you, Nicholas. Florian, grants, loans, user fees, how do we fund the system going forward?
I don't have the answer.
Okay, Tanya, grants.
All of the above.
I think that's already. I mean, if we were all sharing the view that we have to dig into this question, that would be a progress. Because to me, this is where we are right now. I mean, there is again a kind of a split view about the future. One being that this is some bad moment to go through that might last, well, certainly not 1 year as it was envisaged before the summer, but probably more 2 or 3 years. And some others who start to think that this is much more radical than this, and that we will never reach the same level of traffic as we had before. So I don't know which of this vision is correct, but in any case, this calls for some radical rethinking of the financing of the system. And I don't have the answer, but to me, this raises a lot of questions per se. If I just pick an example, the cost of the CNS infrastructure that we had before the crisis in Europe was 1 billion every year. 1 billion euro was spent to finance the CNS infrastructure, so the communication, navigation, and surveillance infrastructure that we have in Europe. The cost of a satellite constellation, and it is a one-off, is about 400 million euro. So if you compare the two, you immediately start to think that there is some kind of improvement, rationalization, optimization, as Nicolas was calling it, that is at stake. And that maybe it needs to be financed in a different manner as well, because today, no matter what you do, if you have your 1 aircraft or your 100 aircraft, this cost is still there. It's still in the system, and someone has to pay for it.
Indeed. Indeed. So Tanya, do you, grants, loans, user fees? What's your? How do we pay for this?
I think everything of the above. But when it's coming to research and the new technologies, I think that should be grants. You know, wherever we can find. When it comes to actually when it's deployment, should be by paying user pay principle. Depends, combination of whatever it is, but whatever we invest, it needs to be in a way very simple. Everything has to contribute to the network. What is the best for the network, and what is the mature solution at the time?
Well, what is best for the network? Thank you. I mean, I would love to push a little bit harder on the user pays for the deployment, because of course the users in that situation are the airlines, aren't they?
That's true.
So, yeah, I mean, so again, you know, perhaps it's for the best we don't have an airline representative on this panel today, but I happen to notice from the list that there might be some watching. The user pays principle and worked through the process of what's best for the network comes back, though, to that conversation, doesn't it? Comes back to the problem of how do we find common pricing for ANSPs, or how do we find ANSP joint behaviour? I mean, at its core, you land back at the sovereignty point, don't you? So can we do a network in a sovereignty environment?
I don't see why not, but you're talking all the time about common prices. Why you would like to have a common price? Shouldn't
well, what I'd like is a unified price for the journey, and I guess what I want is the most efficient price. So I guess I'm getting to a point where why can't the most efficient provider provide the service? I guess that's where I land.
Okay, I think let's be realistic. You know what we can achieve and what we cannot achieve. The same as whatever that mic that you're using is produced somewhere else. Can technology do that? Yes, but we also need to look into what is possibility currently, you know, and we're not going to go away from sovereignty anytime soon. There are military interests, there are state interests, so we need to, and after all, there is geography and different labor laws where you can provide, it just different cost based to the workforce, because we are talking now about SDM and technology deployment, but that's not bulk of the cost of one NSP. It is expensive, but we are relying on these people to operate this.
Okay, thank you. I mean, the controllers are an important part. I shouldn't focus on the controllers. The staff are an important part of an ANSP's cost base. Of course they are. I understand that. But I come back to it again. if in the new world we've got all this new technologies, we've got even there are two sectors in aviation that seem to be doing okay in this crisis. One is cargo and the other is the unmanned area, where there continues to be investments in unmanned aircraft being announced by those famous airframe and aviation experts, Toyota and Hyundai, I hasten to add. There's clearly developments perhaps accelerating in the crisis down the unmanned area. Won't that have an impact on staff? Won't that have an impact on how we deliver ATM? I mean, Florian, let me turn to you as the technology guy in this room. How do you see that as a future?
The answer is yes. I mean, this is the reason why we have taken on board quite early on the drone dimensions, the use space, or whatever you call it. It's simply because there are more and more things which are flying, which are not just commercial aviation, and we know that.
But my question specifically, I guess, in the context of the costs and the personnel costs, is to what extent do you see that advanced automation working its way through the ATM system as well?
I mean, to me, automation is what we are trying to push and to develop in the context of ATM. So that's increased automation support, because we know this is what is behind scalability. This is behind what is of the ability of managing more traffic or less traffic. But again, this is not rocket science that we're doing. And in the same way, this is pretty much what's happening in the UTM domain for the ones who are not only developing the drones, but are developing the traffic management systems that goes with it. It's based on higher degree of automation, which is itself based on higher degree of connectivities between the vehicles themselves and between the vehicle and the control system. So all this is quite known in terms of paths, I would say, and there will be more and more technology ready to provide solution in that domain. I think the question is do we want to act, and is this where we are going to invest in the future? I don't want to get back to that again because that you see it's a kind of trauma, but I was in this wise person group again about 1 year ago, and it was in the middle of this capacity crisis, and it was all about let's recruit more controllers, and the airlines themselves were pushing to say let's recruit more controllers because we need them to handle the system. And this is very strange how we behave collectively. I mean, we always keep making the same mistakes ever and ever again with the same consequences. And then we are all surprised that, oh, guess what? There's less traffic, but we still have the cost of the people we have recruited. So, yeah. I mean, this is where we need to be wiser in terms of how we approach things. I mean, we cannot change the course of what we do every now and then. We do need well-qualified staff to run the system, but we do need as well to continue to invest in the technology upgrade, in a progressive increase of automation. Otherwise, we'll get nowhere.
So basically what you're saying is we need a wiser persons group, not just a wise persons group, but a wiser persons group. So we're almost out of time. And we haven't yet talked about airports, I hasten to add, which is of course another interesting part of this, because airports aren't a sovereignty issue. We've already gone over sovereignty at airports. We've jumped that fence already. So I'd be interested to have a further conversation on that matter at some point. But in the last minute or so, let me ask each of you, Tanya, Nicola, and then you, Florian, one, would you be interested in joining Florian's proposed wiser persons group, not just wise persons, but even more wise persons that get to try to not to solve our last problem, fight the last war, but to fight a new war? And secondly, how do we secure the funding? How do we secure a ATM for the future? So I think I said I'd start with you, Tanya. So Tanya, if you would.
Okay, thank you. I think the solution of the wiser person group is to let industry to sort ourselves. So airports, airspace users, NSPs, and say what we can do and what is our priorities. And there comes European Commission in European context, who is there to support us with a regulatory framework. Sometimes doesn't feel that way to me. And so I would focus, let industry sort ourselves, let us prioritize what can give us to all immediate benefits, and this is how we can start. At least for me, this is a starting point.
Very good. I seem to have lost Nicola. Are you with us, Nicola? Maybe his computer's timed out already. Oh dear. Florian, would you join the Wiser Persons group?
We are trying to get back Nicola, by the way, on stage. So I hope he will be back with us. No, I'm not going to go through another Wise Persons group. Just to be,
I didn't say a Wise Persons group. I said a Wiser Persons group.
Nicola is back, I see.
So, Nicola, let me ask you: would you join a Wiser Persons group, and how do we secure fund, and how do we secure ATM for the future? In the last couple of seconds,
I shared with Florian the experience of the Wise Person group a bit more than 1 year ago. I don't think we can afford to have this type of group too frequently. The previous one was nearly 10 years ago. No, I think what is important is to better follow up what's out of this type of group. So I would rather prefer that there is, I would say, more speedy implementation into the findings of this group, because there was some good points into these findings, or at least more debate around them and further elaboration. Very quickly, because now I see the time, what I would like to maybe emphasize again is my conviction that funding, okay, I said as far as deployment is concerned, we are really deploying with European Commission, with INEA, all the possible mitigation to help and bridge the current situation, because the current situation offers a time gap that we should take benefit of in order to be stronger when challenge will come back, because they will come back and we will need to continue to implement. So be better organized, be clear on what has to be implemented first. That's what we are working on.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, I'm going to stop you there just in the interest of time. Florian, last word to you. How do we secure ATM in the future?
I mean, I think there are different things that have been mentioned by Tanya. The fact that, yes, industry needs to get a grip on it, and to a certain extent, we need to find the right balance between what comes from the institution and what comes from industry, which is, by the way, the purpose of a partnership like SESAR. But if I had to summarize, in my view, I mean, that would be to act at European level. I mean, let's face it, let's see where we are in our industry today, where aviation is today, because we act in a completely disorganized manner. And ATM is the same. I mean, none of the even bigger ANSPs in Europe have the size, the critical size, to act alone. So we can only fix the system and find solutions, including in terms of funding, because this will be more and more difficult in the future if we act at European level. And I think this is where we need to dedicate our energy in the coming steps. Network, Europe, this is where we will find the solutions.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Tanya, as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found that as interesting as I did. I think perhaps we should leave the last words to Florian, which is to say that, or we can continue to act in a completely disorganized manner, the way that we always have in the past. Let's see that we don't do that. Let's see that we do secure our own futures and everybody's futures. So I'd like to thank you all for coming today, for listening to this. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. We'll have another one in a couple of weeks. That'll be number 6 in a series of 4. And I look forward to that, and I look forward to your company then. Until then, I wish you a very good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
It's a pleasure.